Hello everybody. If you're watching this, that means that the Epic live stream for April 5th has gone off and the announcement of Unreal Engine 5's release has come to pass. And so my idea here was to film the video the night before and then release it after Unreal 5 was announced so that everybody could download UE5 and follow along. And if you don't know who I am, which is likely, I work as a technical artist for Quixel Epic. This doesn't have anything to do with them. This is something I built in my spare time. And due to how this all works, I kind of figured nobody else had really figured this out and posted it. So I wanted to show everybody how to do this. So to get started from the thumbnail and the title, you probably realized that this is a tutorial on showing how to build a custom viewport, and we're going to do that without C++ or Python. To show you what it looks like, I will open up the tools menu and I will click on custom viewport, and our custom viewport will open up. It has movement controls, so you can move the camera around, you can look around, and yeah, so that's what we're going to be building. And for anyone panicking over the last 10 seconds or so, I will show how to build the tools menu pop-up to open the editor widget. It's really simple. It's a small Python script, and if you don't know Python, like don't worry about it. I'll show you the things you need to change, and you can just copy the script and place it in your content directory, and it will just work. So before we get started, I want to say that I'm going to assume of some pre-existing knowledge for blueprints and editor widgets. So I'm not going to be building everything node by node, but I will go over all the nodes and all the setup and logic and how all this works, because it's kind of confusing and unintuitive. So, okay, so what we're going to do first is I'm going to open up the editor widget and we're going to look at the designer. As there are some choices and constructions in here that, like I said, aren't intuitive but are required to make this work. So the first thing we're going to click on in the hierarchy is the custom viewport, and if you've named your blueprint something different than I have, which is custom viewport, it will be whatever you've named it. So the first thing we're going to do is click this, and we're going to look over to the right onto the details. We want to turn on is focusable, and the reason we're going to turn that on is that whenever we have this constructed, if we want our widget to be able to listen for inputs, we need to be able to do that, right? Whenever I move the camera, I'm holding down the right mouse button, and whenever I'm moving, I'm holding down W, A, S, and D, right? And this Boolean makes that possible. Okay. The next thing we have is a canvas panel. I've just renamed mine to viewport panel. There are a few things you need to do here. You would want to enable to override accessible defaults. Just set this to auto. We're basically just making sure that we can access the children from the canvas so that they're distinct accessible widgets, as this says. And that's about it. Make sure that the visibility is set to visible so that this is hit testable. And then we have an image that's overlaid on top of everything. The opacity for the brush tint color is set to 0. That's why we don't see anything. And the reason it's here, right, is that the way that UMG works is these are wrappers for Slate, all these widgets, right? And some of them have different behaviors when it comes to inputs. By inputs, I mean like listening to key presses or having drag events or moving the mouse around. And because we need to move the mouse around to replicate camera movements, we need to be able to listen for mouse movement. And if you don't have an image or some other widget that can listen for mouse movements, then you won't be able to replicate mouse movement. So that's why this is basically just a dummy widget that's invisible, but it's just overlaying our viewport. So that's what we're doing here. Again, you just set the alpha of the brush tint color to be 0. You set the size that you want your image to be. Right now it's just 1920 by 1080 since we're using 16 by 9 for this widget. Aside from that, I have the accessibility turned on just in case. Might not do anything here. There are no children, so. And then we have it's enabled, and another very important thing is we want to set the Z order to 1 so that, like it says, higher values are rendered last. So this will appear on top, and that's what we want, so that we can have the mouse movement enabled. And then I have visibility set to visible, so this hit testable. And that should be everything that you need to get started. And now we can open up the graph, right? So going into the event graph, we have a few things set up. For the event tick, we're setting delta time. We're not using it here. Obviously, this is the only thing in the event graph, but I do use it later in some other function. And then we have 2 other events, which are on mouse enter and on mouse leave, and we're setting a boolean for entered. This is useful for the camera movement specifically. If the mouse isn't in the viewport, we don't want to be able to move the camera around. So that's what these are for. The next thing, event construct, is going to call our code to build our viewport. And before we get into that, I kind of want to show what's going on and how this is all possible. So if we go into our content browser and open up a blueprint class, we can type in viewport into here, right? And we have this class here. So if we make an empty one, this is what we have whenever the viewport blueprint pops up. There's not a lot you can do over here. This warning just says this is an experimental class. Don't worry about this getting removed. Right now, this has been in the engine since 4.22, if I remember correctly. Right, but we're not doing anything with this blueprint class. Although, if you want to, you could build some logic in here. There's some things I'm going to show you later about spawning things in the viewport that you could build into this if you wanted. But we're not going to do that for this this tutorial. But I'm just saying it now in case anybody wants to experiment with that. So let's open up the create viewport function and we'll get into what's going on with all of this. So right away we have a sequence node, and first off it's firing into a construct object node, and we're using the viewport class that I just showed you to construct a viewport, and we're using the self for the outer. And then we're just setting a viewport variable that's coming out of here so that we have a reference to our viewport. Now going up, we need to create, or we need to add the viewport widget to our canvas panel. And if you're not familiar with UMG and how all of this works, we have a viewport panel or any other sort of panel that's on this list here, right? And you add children to that. So we have an image that's a child of it. And you can see that it's going into a canvas panel slot. So we're adding our viewport panel, which is just our canvas panel. I've just renamed it. To do that, you'll need to make sure that your canvas panel is set to is variable up here, right? And you drag it out and you set it to the target, and the content is the viewport. So our viewport's going to get added to our viewport panel, and then we're going to cast to the canvas panel slot. And then, importantly, we're going to set the size of the slot. Make sure this is 1:1, and it will fill up the widget borders, or the widget itself. Otherwise, you'll have weird borders if you don't do this. And then we'll have our anchors, and we're only setting the anchors maximum 1:1 so that we're filling up, again, like setting it properly with the size so that everything moves when you scale the widget around. And finally, we're setting the view location. And this is an important concept to understand when working with these viewports. So the target itself is the viewport that we spawned. You can see that. We have a location. So what that means is that a viewport has a world in it, right? And you can see that if you pull off of here, you can see there's a node called get viewport world. And so what this is doing is this is essentially setting the viewport camera in the viewport world and where it's at. So that's what this is doing. Okay, so the next thing coming off the second sequence input or output is that we're going to spawn some things in that world. And if you noticed, whenever I run this widget, we have a background and we have a simple mesh, right? So what's going on is that we're getting the viewport, and the viewport has a node that can pull off of it called spawn, and the target is viewport, and you're using a static mesh class to spawn from. You can spawn lots of things in here. If you want, you can spawn atmospheric fog, the volumetric clouds. You can really put whatever you want into this world. But for this tutorial and scope, I'm just showing you how to spawn a background and the simple mesh, and something else later at the end on how to change the mesh that you spawn after the viewport has been constructed. So anyway, we're casting to the static mesh actor, and if you're spawning something else, you would just cast to whatever class you're spawning. And so here I'm setting the mesh actor to a display mesh variable, and we're not going to use it in this blueprint, but in something that I show at the end of the video when we're talking about changing the mesh, we'll use this variable. The set mobility node is key to getting this to work, changing the mesh afterwards. So if your static mesh component isn't set to movable, you're going to get some errors in the output log, and you're not going to be able to actually change anything. So make sure to set this to movable whenever you're setting up your viewport. And then we're setting the static mesh component. So here I'm just placing a material sphere. You can place whatever you want in here. So that's it for the base mesh. And then I'm spawning a directional light, and then setting the intensity and world rotation and the mobility again. And finally, we're going to make it so that the camera that we spawn from, we get the location from here, right? Which is this. And then we're going to get the actor that we just spawned, so the material sphere, and we're going to basically rotate the camera to look at the mesh whenever the viewport's instructed. That's what this section does. So, and then finally, we're spawning the sky sphere, and it's the same thing as setting up the material sphere again. Here I'm just picking the static mesh sky sphere, setting the scale to be something large, and then we're setting a material on that sphere. The material is super simple. If you're following along with this exactly, all you have to do is make an unlit material, set up a reflection vector with a float 3 with 0, 0, 0 plugged into texture sample that is specifically sampling a cube map. This is the Epic Quad panorama. That's this. It's kind of weird to look at considering the sphere sampling it and the editor viewport sampling it too. But yeah, that's all you have to do. And that's it for constructing the viewport. And if you wanted to stop here, you could, although I don't really see what the point is. So if you're wanting to build some interactability, then keep following. But yeah, that's it if you just want to stop there and then go do your own thing. So that being said, there are a few things that we have to do now if we want movement to work. So what we're going to do is use the functions, the override section. And what we're going to use are on key up, on key down, and on mouse move. And we'll talk about why we don't use on mouse button down in this once I get to that point. So to create these, all you need to do is go to the override section, create on key down and on key up, and on mouse move will already be in here. They'll just be empty. So click on them. And what you're going to do here is basically just recreate this. And what these do, they're just setting these booleans for these keys on if they're pressed or if they're not pressed. I can show you the on key down. It's just, or on key up. It's just the same thing. Just setting these to false. And you're going to want to make sure that your return nodes have the handled event reply plugged into this. They have to have handled or unhandled. So that is how on key up and on key down work. Super simple. The next thing you're going to want to set up is on mouse move, right? So I'll explain how this section works, and then we'll get into the actual camera movement, which is this part here. So the first thing we're doing is we're setting the current mouse X and Y position from the cursor delta, and that's coming out of the mouse event. And what that's going to do is it's basically going to give us the distance that the mouse has traveled since the last time this event was called, which is basically every single time that the mouse moves. And what this will be used for is setting the rotation of our viewport camera. And then we have is mouse button down, and that's the right mouse button. The reason we do that is because we're basically replicating this sort of movement from the main viewport. And the reason that we don't use on mouse button down as a function override is that when I tried to do this, I was noticing that it was consuming an input and basically like freezing everything else while it was detecting if the mouse button was down. But calling this node as a mouse event while the mouse is moving doesn't consume the input, which is what you want. So we do this, and then we're going to do a branch, and we're going to check if we're inside the viewport widget and if the right mouse button is down, which replicates how the camera movement in the normal editor works, is if the right mouse button's down and the viewport is focused. So that is how that works. So now we'll get to the freeform movement section. The inside of this is very messy. You obviously style things however you want. I copied this over from another project and haven't had time to style it, so it's gross, but you know, it is what it is. But anyway, this is the delta time that we set from the event tech, and that's getting plugged into the freeform movement. So this is what this function looks like. I'm going to explain everything. Our input is just a float, which is just the delta time. So what we have to set up, there's two sections. This is the WASD location movement, and then this is just the rotation, right? So the way that the location movement works is that it needs to take rotation into account. Otherwise, it's similar to how if you drop, let's say, a cube in here, right? And you want to move this cube, right? That's fine. And you say you rotate this cube and say that this is now the forward vector of our camera and it's looking this way and we want to move in this direction. If we don't take rotation into account, it will basically just go straight along despite your view direction. So I'll show you how to build that now. So we're going to get the view rotation and we're going to get the forward vector, and we're using delta time to smooth things out. So we have a sort of like little equation to follow, and what that is we get the rotation, the forward vector. This input here is speed, so if you wanted to just do a float, you can, and plug that up here. And we multiply it times delta time, so this value needs to be kind of high since the delta time value is low. Otherwise, your movement's going to basically be negligible. And then you add it to the current view location, and that's your forward movement for W. When S is pressed, you're going to go backwards, so what you need to do is all of this same logic, and then you're just going to subtract this from the current view location, and that will get you forward backwards movement, right? Left to right is exactly the same, except we're going to use the right vector instead to get right and left, exactly the same. So you can see that here, and that's how forward and backwards movement works. Rotation could be done differently. I actually want to say this beforehand. I'm not trying to show best practices right here with any of the math. There's different ways to do this. I'm aware of that. This is super simple to get across in a video, so feel free to replace this with whatever you want. The whole point is just to show you that this is a little weird to get set up with like the image needing to be on top of everything else and all the things that I've shown you how to set up so far. So replace this movement logic with whatever you want. But yeah, so anyway, for the view rotation, what we're going to do is get the view rotation, and we're going to add the X position that we get, the delta basically for X and for Y. And because we want Y to not be inverted whenever we're moving the mouse up and down, we invert it here. And then we're going to add it to the pitch and then set the pitch here. X is unaltered and so is Z. And then for X here, this is the pitch is unaltered, but the yaw, we're going to take the X position, add it to the yaw, add it there, X is unaltered. And that's how the rotation works. And that's it. That's how all of this works. Everything I've just shown you is how you get all of this working. So rotation, and then looking down, moving around, all of that works. I did not add in the Q and E keys to move up and down, but you can very easily add that if you want to. I just didn't have time and didn't really care. I just wanted to get the example up and running. So that is how you get all of this working. Yeah, so there are some other things that, if there's enough interest, I would like to show. I have spent a lot more time building additions to this that are far more complicated than getting the base viewport set up, such as grabbing panel dividers, basically. Setting that logic up is far worse than anything we've shown here. It's very complicated. But if there's interest in things like that, then I'd be happy to show them. So yeah, just let me know in the comments what you think about that and how you would prefer any additions to this tutorial. I had initially planned to do a write-up whenever I was going to include some of the other things that I've made, but it would be far too long, and like I said, I wanted to time this to coincide with the release of Unreal 5 tomorrow, so felt a video was more apropos. So yeah, just let me know, video or written tutorials, however you prefer, for more technical things like this. And the other thing that I wanted to show real quick is a viewport combined with the details panel. And what this does is will allow me to change the mesh that's in the scene, right? So this is super simple to set up. I did not mean to run that. Let's open it up and we can talk about how to do this. So in the previous example, we're using a canvas panel, but for this, I'm using a horizontal box and then dragging in the viewport widget that we added before. This will automatically get added to the user created dropdown, so don't worry about that. And then a details view, and that comes from right here. And to get them to equally fill, all you need to do is click on each one and then set fill on the size, and it will split them apart. So to get the details view to pop up, you need to create this. All you need to do is drag out the details view variable, which again, I think by default it's enabled, but if it's not, turn it on right here, and then just drag it out and then create the set object node and then set this to self. And it has to be under pre-construct. So yeah, set it up just like that. It'll work fine. And then to change the mesh itself, this is where the display mesh variable from the create viewport function comes from, this one right here. So what we're gonna do is whenever our custom mesh variable that we have created here is changed inside our details panel, we detect that, and then we set this custom mesh variable to whatever the user has selected, and then we're going to get the display mesh from our custom viewport, and we're going to set the display mesh to our custom mesh, right? And again, we have to set the mobility like I talked about before, otherwise it won't change in the viewport. So all we're going to do this, if you're not aware, whenever you drag in a user widget like this, so our custom viewport, it is a variable over here. So drag it out and then just type in get display mesh or whatever your variable name is, and then you can get a static mesh component from that and then set up the rest of this logic. And the way that the static mesh works is that we're getting the static mesh component from the viewport class that's in our widget now, as the target and then setting our custom mesh to that. And that's how it works. And if you've never used the details panel inside of an editor widget before, I will show you how to set up the on property change right now. So on your details view, in the designer view, go down to the bottom and then you'll have on property changed and you hit add. I already have it in there, so this will just be a little plus icon. And then you drag out to an equals node and then type in the name of your property. And by property, it's the variable name that you've set your variable to. So in our case, I have this custom mesh variable, so this will be the name. And ideally, you'll set a category. So mine is Viewport, and you can see that we have this here. I want to show you what happens whenever you first drag the details view out. So if I delete the Viewport categories to show and I compile, you're going to have all of these extra categories. But with categories to show, if you type in your category, you hit enter and compile, it will hide everything but your category. So it's really useful because we don't need any of the other categories, right? But yeah, that's how this works. And again, everything works here still. And if you happen to go over to the side, you know, you're still good. Yeah, there's some functionality that can be implemented to make sure that like the drag is only getting recognized up here, but there is some more functionality that I could show in later tutorials to make it so that we're only recognizing input on this side of the widget. So if you want to know how to do that, just let me know. But yeah, that is how the split view works. And I said that I would show how to do the tools view here and opening up our viewport. So what you have to do here is create a Python folder, right? It doesn't look like there's anything in here, but there is. I'll show you that now. If I show Explorer, right, show in Explorer, I have a single file. And if you do this, you have to name it init_unreal.py. And the reason for that is if you have this file named just like this, set up in the content folder, when Unreal starts up, it will detect this and it will automatically run it. It's looking for this name and it will run the file. So I guess if you're a Python heavy user and you're doing something with this file anyway, you know, you could add it in there if you want. Yeah, so that's what you'll need to do, and I can show you the code for it now. If you never used Python, don't worry about any of this. You can just copy this. It's really simple. I'll explain each section that you need to change to get what you want, and we'll just leave it at that. So the first thing you want to change is this My Tools name, and what this is that it's the basically the section name. So name this whatever you want, and the next thing you want to change is this. This is the entry name. So whatever you want basically your menu button to be, this is what you'll name it. This is the tooltip, so whatever you want your tooltip to be. And the next thing you're going to need to add is the path, which is this. This will be the path to your editor widget. So I will show you a really quick way to do that and what this thing expects in terms of pathing. So if I right click my custom widget, I can click copy file path, and I'll go back here and I'll paste it. So what we need to get rid of is the drive up to the project's name actually. So here, content needs to be changed to game because that is how Unreal recognizes it. And then get rid of UAsset on the end. And this is what you will paste in this section here. So that is how that works. So yeah, just place that. I have it here, can't see it obviously. Then restart Unreal and it will be up in your tools menu, and it will call it just fine. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this. Again, if there are any comments or feedback, just leave them and I'll definitely read them. And if you want more content related to the viewport, just let me know and how you want it. So video or written. Yeah. So have a good time with the release of Unreal 5, and I hope you follow along and have fun with this tutorial. Till next time.